How easily can you beat Elden Ring as Morgott? Morgott is the last of all kings, and in this video I'll be taking control of him and using him to fight some of the game's most difficult bosses. The rules of this challenge are simple. We play on max new game difficulty, and this video will not end until we've punished every traitor. This was easily the most difficult challenge I have ever done since I started playing as these bosses, and the fight at the end of this video is definitely one for the books. Before I declare war on my siblings, this video is brought to you by Wanted Dead, a sleeper hit action game from the makers of Ninja Gaiden and Dead or Alive. Featuring a familiar sense of Japanese difficulty, this game's stunning visuals and addictive gameplay make for a highly immersive experience. With a cyberpunk style that takes heavy inspiration from the 80s, Wanted Dead follows a war criminal turned lieutenant as she unravels a major corporate conspiracy. Between its witty humor and engaging story, the game is absolutely brimming with character, and for that reason, you really need to try it out. My favorite thing so far has definitely been the hack and slash combat, and while the game's difficulty does want you dead, it was nothing compared to this Morgott playthrough. In spite of this, the game feels really satisfying to play, and when you finally do get that win, it feels amazing. If you ever need a break from the action, Wanted Dead features several minigames including karaoke, arcade shooters, and even a ramen eating competition. Using my link below, you can get the game on PlayStation for 50% off until August 2nd. But if you prefer another platform, then it's also available on Xbox, Steam, and the Epic Games Store. Thanks again to Wanted Dead for sponsoring this video. Alright, before I even jump into this, shoutouts to Smotown for his video breaking down the lore on Morgott. If you guys haven't seen it yet, then go ahead and check that out because it is really good. Of course, if I get anything wrong in this video, then he's the one to blame. You guys have been begging me to play as Morgott, so here he finally is, and okay, he's not Radagon slow, but he's not exactly fast either. Something tells me this isn't the weirdest fight we're gonna have today. After entering the ring with my alter ego, I go for a few attacks, and that's when I had an epiphany. Morgott sucks. This is the first real boss of the run, and we're barely doing any damage at all. In fact, Morgott's damage is so low that even Margit can kinda tank him. While his combos do look cool, they require a ton of commitment, and when combined with the fact that he has such low HP, we finally have a proper challenge run on our hands. As always, Godrick is a complete tank, but his huge arena lets Morgott run circles around him. I used this fight to experiment with Morgott's golden miracles and very quickly discovered that the hammer is phenomenal for stance breaks and even better for dodging things. Yo, are you guys seeing this? After getting some distance in phase 2, I land yet another stance break, and one more swing of my hammer brings down this woeful traitor. I have a confession to make. Morgott's actually fast. Aside from Morgott himself, the Red Wolf is probably the only boss that can keep up with my speed, but unfortunately he's just as fragile. The sword rain is amazing. This is one of my favorite moves in the entire game, and I'm so glad I was finally able to use it. While Rennala's hiding safely in her bubble, I'm able to completely decimate her ankle biters, and by this point in the run, I really started to get the hang of Morgott's combos. Rennala's low poise makes it super easy to knock her over, and the constant pressure prevents her from getting off a single summon. Things are going really well so far, but there are 3 bosses I'm really worried about in this run, so we'll have to see how it goes. Before we can even make it to those bosses though, we have to take out the Draconic Tree Sentinel, who is notorious for gatekeeping these runs. Hello? This is the first properly difficult boss fight in this entire challenge, but it certainly won't be the last. Morgott's defenses are paper thin, so I'm forced to get creative with how I approach this fight, but it didn't matter much because he still sent us into phase 2. This isn't the worst thing though, because unleashing our cursed blood gives us access to bleed and fire damage, which will both come in handy later on. I don't usually come down here in these runs, but I got a little homesick, so what can I say? Wow, you guys don't recognize me? In case you've been living under a rock or in a sewer, Mohg and Morgott are both the direct offspring of Godfrey and Marika. Unfortunately, they were born with the Omen's curse, and as a result, they were forced to live here. This version of Mohg is different from the one we see in Mohgwyn's palace in 2 ways. The first is that he obviously has less HP, but the second is that he's actually immune to every single status effect, likely because he's an illusion created by us. Speaking of evolutions, Goldfrey hits hard. Since he has the same Crucible emblem as the Margit projections, it's pretty safe to assume that we created him as well. This is where the run's difficulty begins to spike, and that makes perfect sense considering this was Morgott's final defense against any invaders. Because trading with Goldfrey is out of the question, I'm forced to use miracles to try and chip him down, and the most frightening aspect of this fight is definitely the stance breaks. While Goldfrey does manage to land one, Morgott's Cursed Blood saves our life. While he's transitioning into phase 2, Morgott is unable to be staggered by any attacks and gains a 50% damage reduction. Unfortunately, this doesn't carry over into the rest of phase 2, but it does buy us just enough time to get a stagger of our own. It also unlocks one of Morgott's best attacks, which is just enough to carry us through. Morgott is one of the most complex bosses in the entire game, both mechanically and character-wise. Along with having the most attacks out of any boss I have ever played as, he's also the most tragic. Embracing the ideology of his abusers gives Morgott the strength to defend what he deems divine, despite having every reason not to do so, and while he does reject the cursed blood that flows through his veins, that same curse is what makes him formidable. As Morgott enters phase 2, I'm able to land a few hits, but as I mentioned before, the damage is greatly reduced. Morgott's sword rain sends me into phase 2 myself, and now it's anybody's game. In my hands, Morgott is no longer bound by his shackles, and after getting a clutch stance break, I narrowly come out on top. The Fire Giant is a huge problem. Along with a massive 50% resistance to fire, his large sweeping attacks are very difficult to dodge, and without any iframes, this match was a heated one. After several attempts though, I eventually found the answer to all of Morgott's problems: this little bunny hop. While it doesn't seem like much, this hop is a game changer in these fights, and incorporating it into my moveset tipped the scales immediately. Mastering Morgott's movement is the key to winning this fight, and when the Fire Giant enters phase 2, I'm able to take full advantage of his immobility before chucking a spear directly into his chest. Beating the Fire Giant brings us to our first major roadblock, and that's the Godskin Duo. Not only is this a 2v1, but our movement is severely restricted by the confines of their arena, which also results in some pretty terrible camera angles. 15 seconds in, and they've already sent me into phase 2. I make sure to take out the Godskin Noble first since he's the more dangerous one, and now that the fight's a little more fair, I'm able to keep up with the Apostle. When the Noble makes his return, for my second attempt, I realized that the duo is weak to slash, and lucky for Morgott, his Blood Flame attacks are exactly that. With this in mind, I tried to get aggressive with the Apostle in phase 2, but because my HP was already so low, I couldn't really take advantage. After several more attempts, I was starting to believe that this run just wasn't possible, but then it hit me. I'm the boss. That means I don't have to wait until the duo sends me into phase 2. I can just send myself. Doing so gives Morgott access to his best tools and way more time to utilize them. Between the slash and bleed damage, I was finally able to get the upper hand on the Noble, and the crazy thing about this fight is that the Apostle is still a problem. As soon as the Apostle falls though, the Noble returns and I don't hold anything back. I know this is going to be my only chance to take him out. Once I finally do, it's time to take on Maliketh. Uncle Maliketh is the most dangerous boss fight in this entire run, and if we're not careful, then Destined Death could easily destroy us in a matter of seconds. Because Maliketh has such a massive resistance to Holy, Morgott's arsenal of summoned weapons is essentially useless, and that made this fight extremely difficult. With all this in mind, my only option was to not get hit, and what you're watching now is the combination of everything I've learned so far. This fight is a brilliant showcase of Morgott's power, and while I do make fun of Morgott a lot on this channel, he truly is the last of all kings. Placidusax. The hardest thing about this fight was trying to figure out exactly what to do when Placidusax flew into the air, and at one point, I even ended up on his back. Eventually, I found that the best course of action was to just run away, and as long as I kept my distance, then even the dragon's nuke wasn't really a threat. Beating Placidusax brings us over to Gideon, who is always up to no good. This is the perfect chance to try out Morgott's grab, and it's actually pretty strong. While Gideon's monologuing, I'm able to corner him, and this definitely qualifies as bullying. Unlike when I played through the game as Radahn, Morgott has no trouble hitting enemies that are smaller than him, so this fight is as easy as they come. The same can't be said for Godfrey, however, who pushed us to our limit. The fight against our father is quite the spectacle, and judging from Godfrey's reaction of finding Morgott's body at the throne, these two had a strong connection. Now that bond is being tested in fair combat. As Morgott fights to prove himself worthy, time and space itself seems to tear apart, and I actually have no idea why this happened. Maybe I stopped the canon event or something. With the arena itself phasing in and out of existence, I managed to bring Godfrey into phase 2, and not even Morgott's agility can save him from the earthquakes. With just a sliver of HP remaining, poor Loux misses a grab, and thanks to Morgott's speed, I'm able to win the fight. Just like Maliketh, Radagon is 80% resistant to Holy, so conjured weapons are out of the question. Instead, Morgott's curved sword is a great alternative, and because Radagon's so easy to stance break, the 12-hit combo puts in work. When Radagon goes for the Elden Ring, Morgott's agility is on full display, and a few well-timed jumps keeps us safe. One more jump brings Radagon to his knees, and while Elden Beast is also highly resistant to Holy, his attacks are so slow and telegraphed that he isn't really much of a threat. With Elden Beast down, there's just 4 more traitors to punish, and the first boss on that list is Rykard. I have to be honest, I really expected this fight to be much more difficult than it was. Rykard on max new game difficulty without the Serpent Hunter is a Herculean task, but just like Hercules himself, Morgott is a demigod. Like the Elden Beast, Rykard's massive stature makes him incredibly slow, but because he's only 40% resistant to Holy, we get full value out of our miracles. The best one by far is the Sword Rain because it racks up a ton of hits on his large body, and combining that with the bleed from Morgott's curse means that the only thing we need in this fight is a little bit of patience. Now we can finally settle that debate between whether or not Margit beat Radahn in the game's opening cinematic. The answer is yes. The encounter with Mohg is much more than a fight. As twins afflicted by the same curse, we chose 2 drastically different paths, and instead of rejecting his curse, Mohg embraced it. On paper, this is a losing battle. Mohg has nearly twice as much HP, way more poise, and hits a lot harder. The only downside is that he's slow. Even after getting stance broken several times, Mohg refuses to stay down, and his phase 2 health regeneration just adds more fuel to the fire. With my last bit of health, I start chucking spears, and jumping toward him leaves a pool of cursed blood on the ground. That pool was just enough to get us the stance break we needed, and one more combo finishes him off. This fight is not supposed to be won. Malenia is the last remaining traitor and one of the strongest demigods in the game. Between her lifesteal, plot armor, and waterfowl, the odds are certainly not in our favor, but that's never stopped Morgott before. Even when I'm in the sky, waterfowl still hits, and Malenia's small stature makes it really hard to see what she's doing. The fact that she has such low poise should technically work in our favor, but the hyper armor on most of her attacks make it way too risky to rely on. Because of this, knockdown moves are my best bet, and capitalizing on Malenia's passive nature in phase 1 make this fight not impossible. Once Malenia is in phase 2, I changed my strategy completely, as it quickly became clear that she was now in control. After dodging Scarlet Ionia, I punish her with the Blood Flame and manage to knock her over again with a Hammer Spin. When she gets back up, Malenia dodges my spear throw, and as soon as she lands, she finds herself firmly planted in my trap. From there, one more hammer takes her down, and now Morgott can safely say he's defended the Elden Throne. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, then I think you'll really like this one where I lock 5 YouTubers that you probably watch in a volcano for $1,000.